This, of course, is Billy Suarez, and the plane he lost in an accident last year, repaired, came back with a strong wind at Flushing. This is basically one of the reasons that we've gone back to the 60 program. We're seeing just how successful Billy's been with the combinations he's developed with Big Jim. Very impressive airplane. I look for great things for Billy in the next season. These are pictures Mark dropped off at me. He was here at the shop visiting. Doug Cook and his Magician. Joe Ortiz with a plane he unfortunately lost, and I think we have this on video at the Mass Cup. And of course, Woody Midgley, pull test volunteer, great gentleman, great guy to have lunch pizza with, master craftsman of everything. So, we're going to get down. This tape will basically start with the buffing out of Tsunami, and we hope you can pick up some real good tips that'll help you in your program. Now, I'm going to try to just cover a few little points that may or may not help you with your buffing of dope. This is basically going to be covering dope, which is similar to but not exactly like acrylic lacquer. And I'll try to explain the difference. Some of the differences is that dope ages slow, so that before you actually do get to do the actual buffing, I would say a minimum time should be 4 weeks. If you can wait longer, 6, 8 weeks, even better. In other words, with dope, the longer you can wait to do the buffing, the better off you'll be. With acrylic, you pretty much can wait 2-3 days. You can even do it the same day. I've done it the same day. It will dull out maybe a few days later, but you can go right back and buff it right out. So that one of the advantages, if you're going to do acrylic, there's a time advantage. You don't have to wait. Now, what's happened, we're not going to go into too much detail here. We've done that on other videos. But what we're going to try to do is, we really haven't waited to 4 weeks yet. We're probably around a little less than 2 weeks now that we've done the spraying. But what we've done is, in the meantime, while you're waiting for it to harden, you can do all the sanding, which we did on the previous video. We sanded everything out with 600 and 1200. Now you have to go back and look at the video and see what particular sandpaper we used over tissue and some over the wood and whatever. 99 times out of 100 you can get away with 600. Over open bays you're probably going to want 1200. Again, that's a choice that you have to make. But what you can do is, while you're waiting for this to age, and this is where the patience comes in, there's things you can do. In our case, we're going to make up some props. We want to paint a whole bunch of props and get some of these 14.5 cut down rev-ups working. We want to make a whole selection of them. We want to make the landing gear legs. And in our case, we're real fortunate in that we're renovating a bathroom, and so we're not tempted to rush this. If you rush it, you make 4 or 5 times the amount of work you normally would have. You also want to consider some of the mediums you can use. You can use compound. Compound seems to work well. Gorham's. You can use toothpaste. You can also use newspaper. Now, each one has an advantage and a disadvantage. Ski Dombrowski uses newspaper to buff his plane out. Cost is obviously an advantage. Toothpaste is probably the most expensive medium to use. Gorham's probably the best, and compound the cheapest and easiest. Compound, even though it's a little rougher than Gorham's, will bring up a lot of shine real quick. Gorham's will bring up a little more shine than the compound, but it'll take a little bit longer. Toothpaste will take a lot longer, and I would suggest you only use toothpaste on paint that's 6 months old, a year old, and it's really rock hard. Newspaper, again, I don't use newspaper. Ski Dombrowski contributed the idea to me, told me how he did it, but I haven't done it yet. Maybe I'll try it on one of these videos. But for right now, we're going to settle in on the Gorham's. The two choices, white compound and Gorham's. And the way you decide, it's the same as 1200 and 600. You try to use the white compound. If it leaves scratches, it means the paint is still too soft and you have to go to Gorham's. If you use Gorham's and it leaves scratches, then you really should wait for the paint to harden. At no time, let's make a big no wax on new paint. You don't want wax on paint until it's, 2 months old. No wax at all. Nothing with silicone. Because what that does is it seals the paint and it doesn't let the thinner that's still left in the paint evaporate and gas off. It doesn't let the paint harden. It pretty much retards the hardening of the paint. So for the first 2 months, you don't want any wax on it. This is typically the way we do this. Do all your tip weight boxes, all that stuff first, flaps, elevators. Okay, and that establishes what medium you're going to use. Now, a good medium, of course, is Bounty towels, Bounty paper towels. That's one good. Socks, those white woolly socks, and I'll try to go over that technique where you can put a sock on each hand and use both hands to buff at the same time. That's appropriate when doing the fuse. Again, you have to try all these mediums and see which one suits you the best. But by the time you're done with all your small parts, you probably have established that you either like socks or Bounty paper towels, and you've established which compound to use. So you've narrowed this down to one of two things, and like the playoffs in football, and normally I wind up with Bounty towels and Gorham's at the end. Bounty and Gorham's at the end has given me the best shine, but not always. There's always exceptions to these rules. If you're having trouble and it seems like you're buffing and buffing and buffing and the shine isn't coming up, you're not getting that reflective light, well, probably you haven't waited long enough for the paint to dry, or you haven't sanded enough. If the paint looks like this to begin with, that's the reason we sand the whole plane out first. You have to knock down all the mountaintops and then knock down all the valleys until it's flat. If it isn't flat, it's not going to reflect light the way it should. Again, I went over this probably for a half an hour on the basic dope finishing video about light reflection. What you get, and this is an important consideration. If you use epoxy, Imron, Centauri, anything that has two-part mix, one advantage is that it dries relatively wet looking, but it doesn't have the lacquer shine. There's something about buffed out lacquer that, I don't know exactly what the right way to describe it is, but it reflects light beautifully. It has a shine that I've never been able to accomplish with either Imron, epoxy, or Centauri, any of the other paints. Dope or acrylic, materials from the lacquer family always seem to dry harder. The reason they reflect light is on a hardness scale. These are probably a 5 or a 6, and dope is a 9 or a 10. They're harder. They accept that mirror glaze a lot quicker. They usually spray out shiny, but they buff up. Their ability to be buffed is exceptional. And I can remember back in the days when I was into custom motorcycles, custom cars, custom painting boats and guitars, absolutely everybody wanted hand-rubbed lacquer. That was absolutely the zenith of perfection. Not many people were into the other finishes then. I expect that in model aviation, when you're looking for the lightest finish and the nicest shine, one of these two is the choice. If you have a lot of open bays, dope might be worth paying the extra price. If you have a foam wing plane with no open bays, you probably want acrylic. That would be the two. And for sure, if you want that absolute killer, can't be duplicated any other way that I know of shine, it's going to require hand rubbing. It's labor intensive, but when you're finished, you have something that I don't know any other way to obtain, and you probably will be very satisfied with the result. With that in mind, Well, let's go to work. That's what this is all about. And before you can start any buffing job, the first thing is to go around, and I'm doing this real carefully, picking out any little spot that needs a touch-up or an extra coat of clear, because right now is the time to do it. We've got a couple little mistakes here that still need to be corrected with some ink and some clear, but get all of the little touch-ups done before you actually start buffing. Once you start buffing, here's what happens. When you start buffing with compound or gorms, it leaves kind of an oily, slimy finish on it. And even though you might clean it with M600, it's always better before you buff it to do all the touching up. If you then buff through, of course, you have to go back and touch it up. But hopefully you can get all the touch-ups done right now before you actually go out and start the compounding and get your hands all full of grease. And a compound is about 10% oil anyway. So I'll spend the rest of this session just picking away. There's a couple spots back here I want to fix. The fillet back here needs a little repair. Get it all ready so that when we start the compounding, we know from that point on we're not going to have to hopefully spray the minimum amount of touch-up clear. Now, one of the places I do have to touch up on, I sprayed the red on here. You can see I got some red. The both edges, for some reason, it always seems like you wear out the edges and the corners around here. It wore out. So what I did is I put a coat of red around the whole nose here. Just an extra coat of red. I still have to touch up the ink lines in a couple of spots here. This panel is done. This one still has to be. And I just want to give you an example. Just some of the things you can expect. Yes, I've gone right through on the tip there. And because the finish is so thin, it's real easy to go through. But you can see what we are getting is you can kind of look down the wing and get an idea of what kind of a matte finish we have on this. And what I'm going to do is I went through on so many little spots on the ink lines because it's so thin. I'm going to put another clear on the bottom, another coat of clear on the bottom of the body and up around the nose here. And there's a little spot on a scoop where I went through. I'm going to touch that up too. Now I'm trying to just touch up all little spots that I, previous to this, need a second and third coat. And I'm trying to be real careful with it. Up on the nose here, there was a few spots. And I had gone over them around the edges. It seems like you always have a problem around the edges. All the edges of things. At least with this anyway. And before we actually can start some buffing, I want to get this clear on here. The idea is time management, of course. This clear can be drying, and we can be working on the flaps and elevators and tip weight boxes and stuff. So and of course what I'm trying to do is go over all the edges even with an extra coat. Now I've had to touch up these ink lines. So any spot I know I've touched up, I want to get an extra coat on. And then of course all the cap strips get a second coat. Out on the outboard tip, who cares? Just pour it on. Dump the tip in, decoupage it. Gonna put lead out there anyway. Main thing is the cap strips. That's where you almost every time gonna buff right through. Leading edge, you always have problems with the leading edge. You never seem to ever have enough paint on a leading edge. I had a little spot out here on a tip where it needed to be touched up. And I wanted to go right down the edge here. All the cap strip edges, that's where we're really concerned about getting enough. that same old thing we've been talking about, selective finishing. Rather than just blow paint on by the gallon, put it on where it's most likely to do the most good. Edges of the lettering. And go around the lettering. And this will all blend in. We'll be sanding this out again. Probably with 1200, but I know it's a lot of extra work and an extra pain in the neck to constantly be sanding through and touching up, sanding through and touching up. But what happens in the end, you don't have that decoupage. That's the thing at all costs you don't want to have it, that 20-ounce finish. We had a spot back here. Now also, there's some spots back here I had to touch up along the hinge line. You can kind of look around and any spot you see that needs a little touch up, this is a good time to do it. Along the edge here. All the edges, anything that's got an edge is always a candidate for an extra coat. I want to test out this how hard this paint is now. And what I did, I went up to my drawer, and obviously these are my old socks. Now if you notice, I was wearing these socks yesterday. My wife is very thrifty when it comes to buying me new socks, but anyway, since I've been doing construction work, all my clothes are ruined anyway. Anyway, you want to get about 6-8 old socks, that's usually enough. A nice tub of Gorham's, some white polishing compound, and I have two different cans here. I don't know if one is going to be rougher or better. A roll of paper towels, some old terry cloth towels that you can cut up into little pieces and strips. And the first thing to do, obviously, is get out the oldest piece. Now, in our case, we have all the little pieces over here drying and sitting here, the cowlings and everything, rudders and all this stuff. Want to take the piece that's been drying the longest, get it over here and start seeing how hard it is and see if it's ready to be buffed out. Now, if it's too soft, we're not going to be able to buff it out. So there's a lot of things you can do to make your buffing job a lot easier, better, quicker, cleaner, neater, whatever. The biggest single thing that'll contribute to having paint buffed out is that the paint is old enough. Second biggest thing is having the right compound. When paint is soft, it doesn't want to hold a shine, especially dope. Acrylic lacquer, sometimes you can get away with it. Having some socks around will be real handy. Having a bunch of these little pads around will be handy. But the first step is to find out, is this paint hard enough to buff? Now, a typical number on dope is 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, depending on how thick it is, depending on how it's drying. One of the things you can do to make it dry faster is get it into a warm area of your house, by a heating vent, for instance. Another thing, and I want to emphasize this, I told somebody without realizing how some people can misunderstand what you say. I said, get it in a warm area. And what the guy did is he went, and he was living in a part of the country where it's very hot. He put it in his car and went to work. Rolled up all the windows figuring, aha, it'll be a nice 150 degrees in here when I get out. That paint will be dry. I'll go home and teach that windy how to buff. Well, when he got out of the job, went out to look at the plane, first of all, the plane had all bubbled up and blistered up. You never want to make the paint warmer than just warm to the touch, maybe 70, 80 degrees. If it's hot and you can't hold your hand on it, it's way too hot. You'll bubble the fillets, you'll ripple the paint, you'll stretch the silk span to the point where it'll rip and crack on the cap strips. Having it warm is good, having it hot is no good. So keep that in mind. It's like the warm will help the paint gas off and dry a little bit quicker, maybe 10-20%. But putting it in an oven and baking it is not the answer. Putting it by a heating vent where you can hold your hand on it and it's still nice and warm, be a big help. Now I have these heating vents all over the cellar. But the thing that most people get screwed up on a compound of anything is they paint it today and tomorrow they want to run right out and compound it. And sometimes you can get it to compound out real nice, but then a week or two later it dulls right out. Best thing, be patient. In our case, this paint might not be ready to buff now. If it isn't, we have plenty of other jobs to work on here. We're months away from the flying season, and we don't want to make the buffing job any harder than it has to be. Now you'll notice these socks have a fuzzy side and a smooth side. We want the fuzzy side on the outside. What that does, this is the roughest. Terry cloth is the second roughest, and this is the smoothest. So obviously the trick is to try all three of them and find out. I will do a tip weight box first. Just get a rough idea of how long this is going to take to buff out. Now, if you sand with 600 paper, buffing out is going to take a little bit longer than if you do it with 1200. With 1200, the sanding is going to take longer, but the buffing will go quick. When you buff out parts that have been 1200 sanded, it's a matter of seconds and it's buffed out. Now, you've just seen this part. Let's see how long this will take. Wipe the extra compound off. Get it off our slimy sock. And let's get this up on a macro lens and take a little look at it. Now I would say that's almost ready. In fact, we may wait another day and it'll be a lot easier. We'll do all the little parts today. But if you're grinding away and grinding away and grinding away and it isn't coming up, the shine isn't coming up, you haven't sanded enough, or you've done something else to make it harder than it has to be. This should take the amount of time you just saw me work on this part. This is how long it should take. Now another thing you can do, this piece is the piece we just buffed out, another thing you can do to test the hardness of the paint is rub some circles in it. Make swirls. Dry it right off, get all the compound off, and look at it real close. And if you can see the swirls in it, you know the paint is too soft to buff and you're going to take 2 to 3 times longer than necessary to buff it. If we were grinding away now for a long time and we couldn't get this to come up in a relative short amount of time, what we try is we go to another grinding medium like the polishing compound. Typically though, the Gorhams and dope that's 4 to 6 weeks old is a magic combination, and it'll come up real quick for you. It won't be a very time consuming thing. So with that in mind, I want to try a couple of the other parts that are a day or two newer than this and get an idea of just how long we're going to have to wait to buff this out. Now on a macro, you get an idea just how dull this is, just what that looks like up close. And now let's see how long it takes to buff. This is the red. Let's see how long it takes to buff this out. In fact, just for comparison's sake, here's a buffed out part, here's a non-buffed out part. You can see the difference in the surface. This is reflecting light, this isn't. Now a small piece like this, let's just try. I'm going to take a little pad. I still think you can do 90% of this with socks, with the white socks, but I want to show all the different techniques. Now one of the ways, if you really want to put the ultimate fine shine, is when you're all finished with everything, you do it with Bounty towels in Gorhams, and that should give you that really, really crystal fine shine. If you're going for the Concourse Award and you really want to be Mr. Killer Finish, you sand the final coat out with 1200 and Gorhams and nothing else. Let the dope sit 6 weeks and you absolutely will have the killer finish. Okay, now you can see how long I worked on this. It's important to know, because what happens if you spend too much time, if you're grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding and nothing's happening, all you're doing is wearing the paint out, well, you're going to wear all the paint off the plane. It's not supposed to take an endless amount of time to do this. It's going to take long to do the open bays, but these little pieces and the rudder and flaps and stuff should go real quick. Let's take a look at how that looks up close now. That gives you an idea how long this has taken us, what the finish is looking like. It's starting to look real nice. We are definitely on the soft side. This definitely would be better off if we waited another week or so, but because of the time constraints and because I have a break from my bathroom job upstairs, I want to get some of this done. So what I'll try to do is get as many of the little parts done as I can, even though it's a little soft. What's going to happen is 2 to 3 weeks from now, this is going to dull out and require an afternoon of buffing to get it straightened out. But we're going to have to live with that for now. No, I trade these off camera. This is, let's see, Turtle Wax. This is DuPont, the Gorms. This compound here seems a little rougher and grittier. I don't know why, the DuPont 7. This seems like it's leaving some scratches. This seems like it's a lot better. So maybe if you have a choice, or if you want to get a can of both, you want to try both. Now the red compound, as far as I'm concerned, is out of the question. It's just too rough. That's what you use on Edsels and on who knows what, you know, on old women's underwear or something. Right now, it seems like the Gorms is still the best. This is the second finest, and so what I try to do is put them in order of finest to roughest, and you can tell again by the sanding scratches that they leave when you put swirl marks in. So as of right now, I think we'll do most of the job with Gorms, but you may, and especially when you're doing open bays, you want to have rougher and smoother compound, so you can vary it back and forth and try different mediums. We also should have some toothpaste here, because you'll find some compound just cuts it and brings up the shine, and some you can sit and rub until your nose falls off. So best idea, have some of everything. That's always a good. And test on the small parts. By the time we get ready to do the mainframe, we want to have all this figured out, hopefully. Just make it easy on ourselves. Now this is what's nice about having a plane still in pieces. If the rudder was still attached to the airplane, this would be a really delicate job. Instead, now the nice thing about the sock is you have it in your hand, and you can do both sides at once. So doing flaps and elevators, you get, you know, some discount on the buffing time required. If these were in place, it's a more difficult job. I even want to buff out the horn here. Of course, I have the horns painted to match the plane. Anyway, it's for sure that we're using the Gorms on almost everything. Gorm seems like it's going to be the ticket here. But you really should try all the mediums before you make that decision. Now, if this paint was a little bit older, of course, that whole thing, that whole scenario would change. But what I found is that the candy apple on this rudder is really outstanding. The blue is really buffing up like Midgley's old blue plane, in fact. Now, especially on this part, which is the part that's the furthest back in the airplane of all parts, as soon as I see that the compound is starting to turn blue, you can see it's starting to turn blue, I know I'm at about the end of where I can buff without going down into the next color. So I'm going to kind of pack it in on buffing this out for now. And again, because we have so little total finish on here, is very, very careful not to buff right through on a lot of these parts. Okay, believe it or not, the elevator's buffed up real nice. And I'm going to start working on the flaps now. The little bit of time I have left tonight, I'll work on the flaps. You can see where I had to add some clear to the joint here. I added some extra clear, had to touch up that a little bit. So now I'll just dust sand this off and go right in with the Gorms. Alright, this flap took about, I guess, 15 minutes to buff out, so get a little idea of, clean it off here, get a little idea of what kind of shine we have with this buff out. Then we'll just go on to the other one off camera. The bottom line is that the Gorms is working the best, for sure. So we're just going to try to finish this flap up tonight, and that'll probably be all we get to do tonight.
Now I just want to take a break, and one of the things you need when you do a lot of buffing is a break. At the end of buffing out, I have all the little parts buffed out, by the way. More pictures from Walt Prey, this awesome Cardinal with the relentless flaps. Look at this canopy. Is that ever a nice canopy? Pilot and everything. Gold leaf lettering, silver leaf spun lettering. He marked on the back of one of the pictures, it says on this wing, you can't really read it in the picture, it says Wendy's, Cardinal, and of course Pro Stun Products. Walt Prey, obviously one of the top level guys, goes without question, goes without saying. There's another picture of the airplane. Just a nice logo on the tail. I mean, we're talking about logos. Just an unbelievable, and this ought to sell some Cardinal kits somewhere in the world anyway. By the way, that prop that he has on there is a wood 3-blade, one of the things I supplied to him. Another nice picture, and I'll pass these on to Tom Morris, maybe I want to use them in stunt news. Greenaway Hemi, Super Tiger 51. Look at the nose section on this. Again, this was on the other videos. I think this is a duplicate picture of the one Midgley sent me, but just look at some of the workmanship, the flaps, everything. And one final picture of it. Now, one of the reasons for putting this on the video right now is I really need a break. My arm turned into a rubber band here, and I'm really getting tired. So I'm going to do some nail and make up some bell cranks or something here for the rest of the day that doesn't require arm motion. Notice this little scoop on top here. What a nice little touch. But the whole plane is loaded with nice little touches. That's the whole point. This is one of those planes you have to go on tour of. You have to look at it from a lot of different angles, and I'm sure this is right up there with some of the nicest planes that have ever been built, and certainly Walt Prey deserves a lot of credit. A good friend, a good man, a good Cardinal. Back to buffing, baby. Kind of ready here to do the start on the mainframe. I'm not going to get to start it today though, because the plumber is already here with the truck, and we're going to start putting the plumbing in upstairs in the new bathtub. So rather than start this, and I don't like to start it, only work a half an hour and I get frustrated, so I'll kind of let this go for tomorrow. And look around, all of the spots that we touched up, you can see the shiny spots here. The extra clear we put on the bottom, the extra clear up by the scoop here. All of those spots look fine. I think we should be ready to start buffing this guy out, well, as soon as we get this drain in. Now, I haven't worked on this in a couple days, but let me just give you a hint. The old sock with the gorms on it, now you can see it's all stiff and sticky and everything. You have two choices here. You can try to wash this, and I wouldn't wash it in a washing machine. I'd take it and wash it in a, a pail of water or something if you need to use it over. Or another thing, you can clip this end off, and this is what I do, is get rid of this hardened compound, because what happens, it'll scratch the hell out of the rest of the finish. Just get rid of that end of it now, and you can still use this. Hey, this is one of my better socks, got a nice big hole in it. But now you can still use it like a little bit of a mitten, but get rid of that hard, gritty, awful end. That'll scratch the, even if you soften it up with water, it's going to scratch the hell out of things. Now, as always, this has been sitting a couple days more now since the last time we worked on it, and I want to start working on the bottom of the tail. This is all sanded. I pick a spot on the bottom first and work on the bottom before I go ahead and, attack the top. Now all those places with silk span that we put another coat of clear on, I'm going to sand them back out with 1200 real lightly, ever so lightly, just to see. Now, this pad is real handy to have, but the plane keeps walking forward in it. If you have a pad like this, one of the things that's nice to have is, if you can afford it anyway, is get a nice, see, you can use this in another way here up by the fillet. Get a blanket, a nice soft blanket, and lay it over the nose. It keeps the tail from walking around. Now as soon as you get the paint to shine, you'll notice right away you can see some spots that may or may not need to be touched up. If there's dust in the paint, you'll see it right away. All of the little idiosyncrasies will come out. Now I just want to polish this one little spot of the stab on the bottom here. Clean it up. And just show that up on a macro lens here. See how we can even see the reflection of the 18 in the stab. And now as you go out, you can see the part we didn't do. The little part I did on camera, part I didn't do. Point here is you have to determine if it's taking you too long to do this buffing, you know something's wrong, and most likely what's wrong is using the wrong material, you're using something that's too gritty, it's scratching. Well, what you're probably doing is you're not letting the paint dry, and in this light coat, this even is a little soft here. So what I'm going to try to do, maybe even is let this sit another day or so before I come back and work on it again. I had a half hour today after I finished up the bathroom. So what I did, I worked on the back of this fuselage a little bit. You can see I put one glove on each hand, so to speak. And so what this works real well. This is a trick that we really ought to consider. Maybe we'll even try to do the wing some this way. One glove on each hand, and I was using it, you know, with the body in between, just using it like I was polishing shoes or whatever. I did get the bottom of the stab, and it seems like every day it gets easier and easier to buff out here. So with that in mind, hey, work on this a little bit more today. And that towel, by the way, that's a good trick. If you get the thing laid in and you can get it laid so, you know, some weight is on there, it really makes buffing it out a lot easier. Now with the same two socks with a little bit of compound on each side, a little bit of Gorham's, you see what I can do is I can work both sides of the body at once, and the body is usually the biggest pain in the neck to do of any of the parts. And all you really want to do is make sure you don't just go buffing on through without checking it. Every once in a while, give it a little look. Because the paint is soft, it's coming off relatively quickly. As the paint gets harder, you need to grind away at it a little more, but it seems to hold the buffing a lot better. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to get a half hour in here, a half hour before I go to the bathroom job, a half hour afterward. I, you know, sneak down on my lunch hour for 10 minutes. Anything I can do to get a little piece of this buffed out. Now where it's real helpful is like on the rudder. The rudder is always one of the things that's a nuisance. You can kind of work both sides at once, just like you shine in shoes. You can practice up in case you ever go on unemployment. You know, you won't have to go work for Midgley up there like a slave. You can go shine shoes in Penn Station and shine Tsunami rudders or something. Anyway, these are just some of the tips, I hope. I'm not going to get that much time tonight to work on this. Well, let's hope I get tomorrow, maybe I get a decent session in here. Bathroom's coming along great. I'm real excited about it. As soon as I finish that up, we go into full bore ahead testing mode, flying mode, whatever mode, I don't know. Okay. Now you can use the edge of the sock just to wipe off whatever compound is left. And this is what's handy about having this up on a pad like this. Try to get the towel over a part of it, so kind of stabilizes it, and you can get the compound. Now another trick, something that's well worth keeping in mind. Whenever you're doing this kind of stuff, watch the buttons on your shirt, belt buckles, obviously get rid of rings, anything that can, you know, gouge its way in here. I've done it many times. I've stuck a watch band or a ring or whatever without being careful. Just need to be a little careful. But this is the best single way I know of to get the body. And the body is usually about half of the job. You get right in at the fillets, and what happens every time you touch the plane, everything you touch the plane is actually a buffing motion. But the whole trick to remember is almost 90% of what you're doing should be done with the sandpaper. Very little should be done with the compound. If you're doing more than what you should with the compound, if it's taken longer than what I've shown on here to do it, then you really need to do more sanding with the 1200. And you need to do more steps of sanding in between, sanding each coat. And it shouldn't take a whole lot more than that to bring it up.
Now what's happening is where we have some overspray here. You see the overspray going right down the middle of the fuse? Here's a trick. Instead of compounding the hell out of it now for another hour or so, and that's what it would take to get that overspray out, I'll take some 1200 paper and a little bit of the M600 and just resand it. You can always resand the spot that you've just compounded if you see overspray. Now, usually in by the fillets, you'll have the most overspray in here and up on the wing. Because we touched up the edges with red, right in the middle we have overspray. So I'll just take that, go get the M600, sand that right back out, and buff it right out. Also, too, you can see the fillets are another thing. You just have to kind of work. As you're doing the wing, you work on them, and as you're doing the fuselage, you work the fillet both times. As soon as the rag starts to get red, you know you've gone as far as you can go, and you're either going to have to touch up or whatever to, you know. In fact, here's another thing. You can see where we resprayed the clear. This is going to require another sanding out. But, hey, if you want that real light finish with just a minimum amount of paint, there really is a price to pay. You really don't get it for free. You want decoupage, you know, dunk it in a barrel and just walk away. Alright, I'm just finishing this up with a little pad by hand because where the overspray was right in the middle, it was like a stripe going right down the middle. I'll show this up on a macro lens and you'll see it's about perfect right now. Again, I'm being real close on, careful on the edges. You can get an idea now just how nice that buffed right back up. I have a very little time left tonight. I'll get, I'm not even getting a half hour, an hour a session here, and I still have to do the night's work, so anyway, just keep that in mind. Couple more little tips. I'll try to get some tips on here every day while a little bit of time that I have to work on this. Well, last night late, I got to finish the fuselage. The fuselage is finished. And actually, we only buffed through in about 2 or 3 little spots. Right there's one of them that need to be touched up. So I kind of look around just to remind myself now. And I got 2 spots that I really need to touch up so far. Now, here's a good thought that I found out helps a whole lot. At least with my own, way of doing things. If I try to buff for 3 or 4 or 5 hours in a row, I find out that my one arm or my hand or whatever gets very tired. So at this point in working on the model, I came up with a program, and this is what I've been doing. I've been trying to work an hour, hour and a half in the morning, go do my business stuff upstairs, come down in the evening, work another hour, hour and a half. So I get a total of between 2 and 3 hours a day working on this. And what happens is I get a lot more done in 2 or 3 hours because I'm fresh for that whole first hour. When I try to put 4 or 5 hours in a row on a thing, my arm just gets tired, I get cranky, I get bored, I get sick of watching Reno videos, I get whatever. So here's my suggestion. If you can gauge it, and this is like a time management thing, if you can gauge it so you can work until a point of fatigue sets in, then put it aside and work on something else, or in my case, I'm working on a house. So normally I could have done this whole plane maybe in 3 days if I did a Saturday, a Sunday, and a Monday that I didn't work. But it's dragging out to about 2 weeks, but I'm doing it in little sections, and what I'm doing it really with an eye on perfection, trying to get every little corner and every little fillet and everything perfect. So normally I would allow maybe realistically a week for buffing out, and now I'm allowing maybe 2 weeks. I don't know, maybe even more. But I'm hoping that the result will be that it'll be perfect when I'm finished, or it'll be a lot better than it. And right now the fuselage is just really nice. You rub your hand on this and it's really smooth and everything. So, okay, I have to finish the stab, and then I'm going to sand out the wing with 12. I hope I get to do this. Might have about 2 hours. Maybe even get 1 wing panel sanded out today. And then we're going to go into some of the touch-ups. That's an important thing too. Now what's happened here, and it's interesting, is I did the bottom of this stab up, trying to remember, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, a week ago, I don't know. But as I'm going into the buffing job now, because I'm working on the top of the airplane now, it's getting easier and easier to buff the paint out. The reason for that is the paint is getting older and older. Now I mentioned touch-up. One of the things that's going to happen when you do a very thin finish like this is inevitably you're going to go through and some edges. In fact, I'm going through right here. Now that makes 3 spots I have to touch up. And you have to, one of the things you have to resign yourself to is you're either going to wind up putting a ton of paint on the airplane, and you won't have these these little buff throughs and rub throughs. If you wind up with the right amount of finish where it's really nice and light, super light even, if you wind up with that 7 or 8 ounce finish, you're going to have to do some touch-up work, and you're going to have to do it in a way that it doesn't show when you're finished. Now we're going to have some spots to touch up, and one of the things I don't know yet, this is the first time we've used this Midgley Red special paint, is just how well it touches up. Candy apple paint is a son of a gun to touch up. I don't know yet if this red is going to be reasonable, unreasonable, or just a complete, undoable thing. But the spots that I have, even if I decided not to touch them up, what would happen is you probably, except for very few people on the planet, the average person wouldn't even see it, even under fluorescent lights. And remember, we're working under fluorescent lights where every single flaw in the airplane shows under fluorescence. When you take this out on in sunlight, you won't see any of these mistakes. You won't even see some of the buff throughs, in fact. Now, what's happened, I don't know if you can compare when we buffed the bottom of this out, how long it seemed like it took 2 or 3 times as long. Right now, the top of this is just buffing out like, I guess, as good as I've ever seen dope buff out. Remember, if you use an acrylic, you can buff it out a lot sooner. One of the downsides of dope is that waiting period. Now I'll try to get this up on a macro lens so you get some of the extra compound off. Just pull the sock up on your hand a little bit and you can kind of dry it right off. I'll give you an idea of what we're getting as far as the reflective. Can we see ourselves? Yeah. Can we read the number 18 in the tail? Yeah. Kind of like that. Now the outside one you can see isn't buffed yet. See the difference in the texture? The outside one still has to be buffed. And one of the things I hope this really happens is if you have an old plane that's a year old or 2 old, you never buffed it out, maybe you'll go out and practice on that a little bit. Get a little feel for just what's involved in buffing it out. And hey, try some of this. To me, there is nothing on the whole planet nicer than a buffed out paint job. In fact, the whole reason I got involved in paint as a lifelong interest is when I was a kid, I used to see all these Jerry Cipernoblas and Lou McFarlane Sharks and everything, Billy Werwidge's Aries, and I said, just loved it. They looked like they were made out of plastic. And I said, someday I will have that, and someday I will be a person who can do that at will too. Now it's taken me a long time, obviously, but if you can learn from this, you'll be way ahead of where I was, because it took me an awful long time to figure out everything that I've put on these videos. Has probably taken me it's taken me 41 years to figure it out. You could learn it hopefully in a couple hours. Now what I like to do is after I finish one surface, and we haven't even put the final shine on here yet. I like to wait till the whole job is over to put the final shine on. What I like to do is get each panel, each area. Remember, I'm dividing the airplane up like it was a big puzzle. And these are pieces. This is a section, this is a section, this is a section. Rudder is a section. I want to now look, and if I have any spots where I see scratches, I know I have to change my technique. And I've tried about 5 times already using this white compound on this plane. White compound usually cuts quicker than Gorham's, but you don't get anywhere near the nice finish. It's not even close. So we've abandoned the white compound altogether for this job, this particular job, and we're going to go strictly with the Gorham's. with right now. Now all these open bays where we had the extra, I got the 1200 sandpaper with the yellow back, the soft back now. As we're doing the last coat, this is the only sandpaper to use on open bays for the last coat if you want the bays to come out real nice. I'll do one bay. Now I haven't done the leading trailing edges or anything. I want to do the bays first, and the reason for that is just in case I go through or I need a little more clear or I need a touch-up, what it allows me to do is do the spraying and then go over and work on the other wing or work on the bottom while this is drying. So you get a little insurance here just in case, and everybody seems to go through at least once or twice. The only guy I can see that did an open bay wing and didn't go through was Dombrowski, and we only count humans, so he's too good for his own good. Okay, now that's the amount of sanding that you usually need. You can get a look at what the sanding looks like. Here we're on the normally sprayed paint. About a minute to 2 minutes a bay, and we have a flat matte finish. Here's a bay that isn't done yet, a bay that is done. If you get used to what that looks like, you're buffing. See, 90% of what you do happens with sandpaper. The buffing, the actual compound touching the paint, is only about 10% of the final job. Alright, what I'm going to do now, I'll just buff one panel out here just to get a feel for how this is dried up. You can see the roughness here, but make sure, now no 600 on this, we're doing the 1200 with the yellow soft back. Now another thing too, Norton 1200 paper with the black back is much rougher. You want to have the 1200 with the yellow back for getting that real matte look finish. Now on bays, I like to, most of the time I can get away with a circular motion. Get rid of the sandpaper. If you get that technique in mind that you're doing 90% of what you're doing is with the sandpaper. Where people make a project out of buffing a plane out is they don't want to do the sanding, and what they do is by not doing the sanding to where it's an absolute dull flat 1200 matte finish, what happens is you wind up buffing takes 10 times as long as doing it with the sandpaper. The sandpaper is a big giant shortcut. Now, I'm only going to do just a little bit here because I want to see what it's coming out like. Now, this has no final shine on it yet. Now, that's one bay. Now, just as an example, if I could show this as an example, this wingtip here I have not sanded out yet. If I want to get that finish to match that finish, it's going to take an awful lot. I mean, I'm only going to do one little stripe here till I get the finish the same. But I'm going to be here an awful long time. Especially if you try to do over-sprayed paint. If you're not sanding between coats and touching up like you've seen on this set of videos, you're making so much work for yourself that it's incredible. Now, it eventually will come up. You could eventually eliminate some of the sanding, but you would be doing 5-6 times the amount of buffing to get it the way you would want it. Now if you look real close, you can still see sanding scratches in here. This is the part we haven't done yet, and you can see little imperfections in the paint. But this part here, you can still see there's sanding scratches, and what that's telling you is, remember we touched up the silk span. So this paint is really 3 or 4 days newer than the paint around it. So one of the choices we have now, because we still have sanding scratches, we can kind of let this go, or we can move on and do the wood, or some spot. Actually, we don't have any spot that's aged now. Both of the wing, actually the bottom is a day or two older than the top, so maybe what we'll do is we'll work on the bottom for a little while here. But when you see the sanding scratches, you know that's going to be, and just get used to candling it. The reason I'm doing this is, see, this bay is buffed, this little spot is buffed. Get used to candling it. Light bounces off. You can see this light reflection here. And always, remember when we did the Make the Shop video here, always work on the fluorescent lights. Even if you have to go out and spend your wife's inheritance on fluorescent lights, get the fluorescent lights. Now, one thing in this session I've noticed is as I've gone off the blue onto the red, the paint has been a lot easier to buff, and I wanted to explain the reason for that. Is when I was touching this up, in the various sandings and touchings up, I always put a lot of extra paint out on the blue to cover the 18 up and this stripe. So what happens is there's more paint here than there is here, and this takes longer to dry. As I've gone out onto today anyway, it seems like the paint is coming up a lot quicker. I fooled around with this last night, and I tried to get this to, to buff up, and it was just taking way too long. And so I just quit and I did some other stuff. But today, I really want to get this guy. I really would like to get at least the top of one panel buffed out today, just so I can see how this is, hardening up and drying up and everything. And it seems like as I've gone out onto the red and the lettering, it's gotten more reasonable. So the motto here is, if you're in doubt, wait. Let's get a little look at this right now. Just kind of clean this off. If you know what you're looking for, if you know what that look is about, you're not going to have any trouble doing this. Again, if you know what that look is, it's this. I know I'm going over this over and over again, but this is important, is you have to know what it looks like. And once you get it buffed out here, of course, you don't want to keep going until you go right through into China to the silk span or whatever. Get it buffed, get a nice shine on it. Another thing too, because we really haven't waited the 6 or 8 weeks here, what's going to happen is a week or two from now, and I'll try to show this on the video if I can, a week or two from now it's going to kind of dull out and go, oh. And what'll be, it'll just be a quick swipe with the compound or with the final shine, will bring it right back up. But if right now, if you were to go and put some Simonize on this and wax it, some kind of car wax, at that point in time you seal the finish and it'll take forever to dry and harden up. And we'd like this to dry up in another 2 weeks while we're doing all the other work on the plane. And just constantly get used to, what does it look like before I sand it? What does it look like after the 1200 sanding and the buffing? You can see I've got a little spot where I buffed through right here. I'm going to have to touch up. There's probably by now there's 7 or 8 spots I'm going to need to touch up, either with a brush or with a spray or whatever, and then blend them right back in. The nice thing about doing any kind of lacquer is repairable. If this was an Imran job, a Centauri job, you got to repaint the whole panel. You can't touch up a little spot. With this, we can make a little mask and just hit that and it's done. Again, I'll take a panel just to give a time reference here. This is the one that's buffed. This is the one that has nothing. I'll take the 1200. I've used the same piece of sandpaper. I have not switched the piece of sandpaper yet. Now what'll happen if you decide you want to, go into 600 and do open bays, you're going to wind up with what I call unrepairable scratches. Is to get them out, you have to really buff until your hand falls off or whatever. I have really done a lot of work trying to determine what's the best way to do these open bays, and it's definitely a question of the 1200 yellowback sandpaper and the Gorhams. I always, as I said in the beginning of the video, I always go and try everything, but I always seem to wind up with the Gorhams as the best choice anytime I have dope or the 380, the acrylic. Again, always getting in the corners. Now remember, we only really have 1 or 1.5 coats of very thin clear, so I don't want to do any more sanding and buffing than I have to get through a bay. And the thing is, almost anybody can do a foam wing. That's the deal. If you have a foam wing and you want to buff it out, the skill required is very low. Almost anybody can do that. But to do an open bay wing, an I-beam wing, it's kind of labor intensive. And it's kind of like having an old Chris Craft wood boat or Lionel trains or whatever. It's kind of a step back into the past when life was a little different, things were a little different, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a way to get away from reality. The reality of life itself right now is like a foam wing. I'd like to go back myself. Hey, maybe that's Joe Adamusco calling. I'm expecting Joe to call. Now, for some reason, this bay really was, I don't know what the deal is. Really was very soft, I guess, the paint was. I'm trying not to go through on the edges here. That's what I'm being very careful of, not to candle it and go through on the edges. Getting in the corners is usually the hardest part of all, to get the corners nice.
Oh, we're really starting to see some results here for the effort that we're putting in here. Now we're going to just pick it up with this ring panel here. Just pay, I guess the best thing you did, for some reason this panel didn't want to, I don't know if maybe I put a lot of extra clear over a little Tsunami there or something, but you can start to get some satisfaction out of seeing that the shine is coming up, and working on the leading edges and the tips is a piece of cake. When you're working on solid wood, as I said before, it's just a piece of cake.
Now, another technique here you can use, I'm not going to use it today, but it's good, is start the sanding and go do all the bays with the sanding and then buff them all. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm hitting spots here where the paint is really still too soft to buff. And I remember going over these edges and stuff. But what I'm trying to bring out, there's obviously more than one way to skin a cat here. You could sand the whole, all the bays with the 1200 and go back and do all the buffing. The reason I'm doing it this way is because I'm really not sure the paint is even hard enough to buff yet to get the kind of final shine. Now, when we put the final shine on this, you can add about 30% to the gloss of the paint. But I don't like to put the final shine on until I have all of the touch-ups done. And right up until that last step, right up until the last second, we're touching up paint, if you've noticed that. And what we actually will do is if this plane goes to the, if this is the plane of choice to go to Lubbock, what we'll do is take a little jar with each color of paint and an ink pen down, and just before appearance judging, run around and touch up all the spots. Now, normally, that may sound like overkill or whatever, but believe me, when you get to a place, and we're looking at the Nats in Lubbock, it'll be very hot probably, and when it gets hot, planes get heavy, you know, hot, high, and humid. So what we're hoping is that one of our little things that'll be in our favor is we won't be carrying around the weight of a canopy. We won't be carrying around the weight of maybe 3 ounces of extra clear that never got sanded and buffed off. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Just the biggest problem anybody is going to have is with the bays. I mean, I keep going back over this of even the Red Baron. When I buffed out the Red Baron, it was such a piece of cake. It's all foam. Piece of cake. When you have Relentless with the flaps or a Nobler, anything where you have bays, and I've been using a sock and a little pad, both. When you have bays and you don't know the technique for doing them, it can make you crazy. You can want to bite bite the wing or something. Anyway, and by sharing this information, boy, I remember years ago, and I don't want to mention any names, years ago I asked a lot of people, hey, how do you do that, how do you do that? And the only people I remember being really super helpful were Harold Price, John DeTavio, a couple of others, but boy, everybody kept everything a secret. It was terrible. And they'd tell you things that weren't true. Go paint your plane with aerogloss thinner or something and you'd ruin a plane. But thank God we're out of that dark age of stunt when everybody was keeping secrets, and we're kind of into an age, I think, generally, most people will share what they know with you. Makes it a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable. Hey, looking forward to seeing Joe Adamusco today if he gets his dupad down here. We're in the middle of a rainstorm of all things, so maybe he'll get down here. He was responsible for getting me started on this project. I'm just really trying to get, maybe I'll even try to get this whole panel buffed out since Joe's coming today. But I guess it's good to know that you pace yourself. I guess one of the lessons you could get out of this is pace yourself. Don't make yourself crazy about trying to do it in 2 or 3 days. If you try to rush it, you wind up with nothing but a mess, really. Work the corners real nicely. Now, obviously, let's see if I'm getting this out. One of the ways you could make this job a lot easier is to have, remember in the old days, they painted the leading edge, the stripe went across the sheeting, and nothing was on here except some decals? Well, they did that for a reason, because that meant that you could sand the open bays a lot easier and buff them. Well, in this day and age, hey, you know, we have exotic lettering, who knows what, needlepoint, concrete work, cement work, everything out on the open bays here. We got every kind of color fade and airbrush work and whatever, disappear and point lettering. So now you have to take into account that, hey, I want to be able to buff this out. If all this lettering, if it wasn't buffed out, really wouldn't be worth a whole lot. I remember the real nice, while we're talking about lettering, the real nice lettering Glenn Metter had at one time, he called it Superman lettering, for lack of a better word. But boy, did that stand out nicely. I remember that well. Hats off to Glenn, he did a good job there. I remember it. Red Baron lettering, Tsunami lettering, Walt Prey lettering, Midgley lettering. Oh, there's no end to it. But one of the things I just want to mention here, because now I have like half of the wing buffed out, and I'm tempted to do this. I want to show this on the video. I'm tempted to go back and forth like this. If you do that, you immediately go right through to every cap strip, especially if you have an I-beam plane. What you want to do, and I mean, maybe this is self-explanatory, but what I'm trying to do is on this video get every possible little bit of information I can to help you buff out your plane. If you start going back and forth over ribs, you knock every cap strip right to death. Never do this. You'll notice all the motions I've used are kind of back and forth or circular or in corners, but you never go back and forth over cap strips. You can go front to back, but if you go, you just tear up the edges no matter how carefully you round them off of every cap strip. And that also goes for the sanding. Another thing I just want to show you, start sanding like this, kiss every cap strip edge goodbye. Try to notice that I'm going in between the bays the long way. Especially true on an I-beamer. Especially true. And of course, when you're doing the sanding here, because we only have one coat of clear, I kind of expect I'm going to come up through some of the bays. You just noticed I just went through on an incline here, but I wanted to show this little spot that we're going through an incline here. Now this is a joint in the paint, so this will be one of the other spots, and we've got about 9 or 10 of them now that we need to touch up, but we really have kept the finish nice and thin. I just want to show this on a video. I'm starting to pick up some blue paint with the compound, so what I do now, that's the end of my buffing in this panel. This panel I'm just about finished. I'll kind of clean it off with the back of the sock. Once I start picking up blue, because I don't want to start adding clear and more paint to this that I don't have to, that's the end of when you can buff it out without adding more clear. As soon as you see the color coming through there. And when you know you're at the end of one bay and you know you see either the red or the blue coming through, move on to the next bay. That's it, and believe it or not, that bay doesn't look too bad anyway, so we'll pick up the rest of it with final shine. Now what happens if you keep sanding that, you're going to have not only a repair, but a spot that you're going to have to buff out a whole bay. Rebuff it, resand it, let it dry 2 weeks. It turns into a little bit of a pain in the neck. So it's better just to go on to the next bay. Of course, the same thing is true when you're looking at the M600. All of a sudden you see blue or red M600, it starts changing color. That's the point at which you have to stop, add some more clear if you want to continue buffing it out. But I hope what you get is the idea of just how much sanding goes into one of these bays. When you go to appearance judging and you see a beautifully buffed out, built up wing, and right next to it a beautifully buffed out foam wing, you'll at least be a connoisseur enough to know the difference, that one took a really long time, like Ski Dombrowski's plane, and one took less time, even though it's the same amount of love and care went into it, just a lot more time doing these built-up wings. And I remember Fancher at one time telling me, right at appearance judging, he says, I can't vote for a foam wing plane. So Ted, I think you were right, and I agree with you. Years have gone by, and I've come to agree with you. Now I'm up to just trying to finish this panel before Joe Adamusco actually gets here so I can impress him with my great buffing. The parts of the wing, like the leading edge and the trailing edge and the tip where it's solid wood, they go pretty quickly. Actually, the whole thing's going pretty quick. I don't know what I'm complaining about. If I get one panel finished right now, I'll be real happy. Again, I'm getting right down to business here on the wood. You don't have a problem doing the wood. You don't go through or anything. I've taken it out of the pad because my arm is getting sore in that one position. I'm up too high. So with the foam pad on here, you can put it right down on the table. Makes it a little bit easier. Again, your arm can only take so many hours of this. I don't care how tough you are. Even if you're midgely, after a couple hours of this, 2-3 hours maybe the most, you're tired. So maybe I'll just finish this panel up. Kind of looking forward to seeing Joe here today. But really, the weather is so bad out there. Gee, it's unbelievable. It's like an ice storm. I have everything. Now here's a place you can really screw up, is when you're doing the leading edge where it blends out onto the cap strips, you want to go real careful over that joint, because if you start walking out, everywhere a cap strip joins the sheeting, you'll wear out the paint. So when I get up on that ridge, that high point, I'm real careful and slow. Don't go grinding away. Now what I try to do is get right in by the fillet also while I have the sock on my hand. Get right in there and buff the fillet at the same time. With these nice big wood fillets, they buff up beautifully. It's a nice focal point on a plane, in fact, how nice the fillets are. And I'm trying not to wear out the leading edge, even though the leading edge is one of the things I like to get really smooth, because what they do at appearance judging, they rub the leading edge for some reason, I don't know. You know, RC people, who knows what the mentality is. They rub the leading edge, they rub the fillets. Okay, that just about finishes up now. I'm just wiping it dry here. That finishes up one panel. Now from this point on, I'm just going to, you obviously could see the other panel is ready to be sanded and buffed, but I don't think I'm going to get a whole lot more than one panel done today. We have company coming, Joe's coming, and maybe we'll do a little more on the other wing until Joe gets here, but I don't want to tire myself out because I want to get a session in either late tonight or tomorrow. I really want to get most of this done, and then I want to get the assembly started, get the flaps on permanently, make up the gear legs, the props, and everything. So it's been a real productive session though.
See a pamper guy?
Yeah, he's in a pamphlet. Anybody doesn't know, this is the official Joe Adamusco, and he's got a story that'll blow your mind. Check this out. Put the hat on. Show him the story.
Oh, yeah, you gotta look at the hat.
Okay, tell him the story here.
Okay, the story is that this is a free $1 hat that I got at work. It's white, reflects the sun. I wore this to the Reno Air Races in 1989. And I was in the pit area, had a pit pass. I went down, looked at all the airplanes, and Tsunami fascinated me. And just like a dumb tourist with my little backpack on with my camera, water bottle, and all these kind of things, I'm standing there like this, looking at Tsunami in the pit all ripped apart. And little did I know at the time that on a trailer behind, a service trailer behind this truck, a magazine photographer was taking pictures of Tsunami, and there I am, standing right in front of it.
Now check this out.
Yeah, but you have to use your microscope to see.
I gotta get the macro lens here. Okay, wait a minute.
To find the guy with the white hat.
Here's Tsunami. This is the cover of Air Classics. Now here you can just get an idea. They're ripping it all apart at the Reno Air Race. But look right down in the corner here. Let me see if I can get it on the macro lens. There's Joe Adamusco with the white hat. And look, there he is. Now he probably was selling drugs here. I see he's got his hand out with some $100 bills here. Is that ever cool or what? I mean, talk about coincidences. And that's the kind of stuff that makes doing a model like Tsunami worthwhile. Kind of cool. Now, the first thing today is I got out to touch up paint, and I'll be using this the rest of the day to go over some of the little spots that I've buffed through from the day before. And it's on this side of right in here there's a spot I wanted to touch up, so I'm just starting to build up layers of paint with the paintbrush. Because I want them to dry, at least 2 or 3 hours between coats, and then I can block sand it out and kind of blend it in and try to do that later on. But, of course, any little spot you buff through, this is a good time to start the touch-up process. Get a little bit on there started. What we'll do today, start this other wing. The other wing looks like 80 grit sandpaper now that the first one is buffed out. Quite a difference. Anyway, I want to get buffing. Got a nice session here. Have some free time, and I hope I can get this one buffed out today. Now most of what we're doing is just repeating the steps from yesterday, and we'll just try to cover any little steps that may be different on this panel, or if we go through in some spots or have a problem, maybe we can give you the proper repair for it. I don't know yet. But even, here's a point here, is even just one day more of, of drying, it's just unbelievable. It just gets easier and easier and easier to do the sanding, especially when you do the 1200. It's just incredible how time and dope, the dope likes to dry. So obviously, if one suggestion would be is if you put your last coat of clear on, don't even bother sanding it for a couple of weeks. And as you sand it, it'll just get easier and easier as the days go by. I remember Lou Walgas once, was it Lou? Yeah, man, I think it was Lou. He put a plane aside to dry for 2 years, for whatever reason. I think it was sand and primer. And what happened is it sanded so nice and, buttery soft and easy and everything that, the paint just gets easier and easier and easier. You'll notice if you go take an old plane that's 5 years old, we go take one of those old planes over there, the paint will just butter right off. It's amazing how easy it comes off. And we're just going to go right down the row here. I really want to try to get this, if I can get this panel sanded today, I'll feel real good about it. Get one more panel buffed out. Had a real nice visit with Joe Adamusco yesterday. The stunt forum is coming up. We'll be videotaping that. The vintage stunt meet is this week. Midgley's supposed to get me some video. Looking forward to a lot of good things. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do here, and it's not working out as well as I thought, I wanted to watch this movie. This is Spielberg's movie, Empire of the Sun. If you've never seen this movie, there's some footage of Mustangs in it. I guess it's toward the end of the movie, and I'm really just watching the whole movie here, trying to come up to that point in time when the Mustang flies by and the kid shouts out, "Cadillac of the sky, P-51, Cadillac of the sky." But anyway, one of the points here is if you got a good movie like this to watch, hey, you can be doing most of this and watching TV at the same time. Just another tip to make the boredom go away. Since you're dealing with so many hours here, it's like a long car ride. Anything to break up the boredom. Eat pizza, drink coffee, whatever. This is an excellent movie, though. This is coming up real nice now. Certainly a lot nicer than yesterday, the day before. Now you can see I got basically 3 panels here done. I'm just working my way right out the wing. I sanded them all ahead of time as I was watching this movie here. You really don't have to pay attention when you do this. You can kind of be doing something else at the same time. You're really coming up nice. I'm real happy with this so far. Finishing up this last little corner here. Oh, here's that scene in the movie. Hey! Come on, P-51, Cadillac of the Sky. Check this out. Look at these Mustangs. Oh my God, Mustangs. If you haven't seen this movie, you gotta see it. Empire of the Sun. Unbelievable Steven Spielberg movie, just great. Great movie for buffing out a plane, especially if you have a buffing out a P-51. Great footage. Here comes the, look at this, check this out. Now, how can you watch this and not want to build a Mustang? Come on, General Champ, draw the plans already. Look at this. Oh, Chris McMillan would go crazy. Oh my God, Midgley's flying it. Oh, P-51, Cadillac of the Sky. Outrageous. Outrageous. Movie to buff a plane out by. Unbelievable. Thought you'd enjoy that. No substitute for a good movie to help you get through a buffing job. I love it. The only thing left to do today, yesterday we finished buffing. We really got the whole top of the wing looking good. I'm real happy with that. Just takes time. It's just so time consuming and I really want this to be right. So today the trick is we're going to flip it over and try to do the other side. Now when we finish the bottom of the wing, it'll be time to assemble the airplane and do the little touch-ups. All the while I've been doing the little touch-ups with the red brush all along little spots that I might have buffed through here. But the number one thing is this, the top is the part that's really going to matter, that really I want to have it as perfect as possible. And when I get to the bottom, now I'll really take my time, but I know there's a little less clear on the bottom, there's just a little bit less I can do on the bottom. But hey, let's get on with it, man. Time to go, Midgley. Get the canopy. And most of what we do on the bottom is just going to be a repeat performance at the top. Except we're going to try to do a little less sanding and a little less buffing. I don't want to buff through any spots. I don't want to have to spray any more clear on here. It looks like we actually have one less coat of clear on the bottom than on the top, so it's just going to mean being real careful with the sanding operation. Now it's funny, everything is buffed out except the bottom here. And it feels funny now that the whole plane is getting all nice and smooth and shiny and everything. It feels funny to be touching this. Anyway, we will get busy sanding away here. There's not a lot of problems here. I only see 1 or 2 little spots I need to be touched up, so I'm just going to get on sanding it. And just to show you this, there's so little paint on the bottom, as soon as I hit it, I've gone through a couple of spots here need to be touched up, a couple of spots up here, I'm trying to find them, where the heck are they? Up here. Need some little touch-ups here, so I'm just doing this very, very gingerly. You can see how matte, this is the part that isn't sanded yet, and it's completely matte, and I really have to be delicate here. Now, I really don't want to go and have to put another coat of clear on this. I really would like to live with what I have right there, right now. That would be real nice if I could do it, if I can get it buffed out and then just touch those spots up, and that's what we're going to try to do here. Of course, the foam pad is handy to have. Now, before I have this panel finished, and it really did come out as good as you can expect for a panel that has very little clear in it. The outside panel has a little more clear. What I want to do, though, is I want to put a couple of coats. Again, I got the old touch-up paint out. I want to just get some fill, and I'll try to explain this. When you have a little ditch, like we have here, where I've buffed through, you have a little low spot. What I'm trying to do is build that up higher than the paint around it, and then I'll real gradually block sand it in. You can do this with an airbrush. It'd probably be a little bit neater and better and whatever. Being this is on the bottom, I'm not going to worry about it. I just want to get this area filled with paint. Let it dry, and then while I'm buffing the other panel, this can be drying, and I can kind of hit it with the sandpaper. Now, there's some red spots. I've been touching them up. I leave the jar out constantly now. Leave the lid off the jar even. Just let it dry out. There's a couple little spots around the fillets I want to go after. Those, again, I'm going to try that same old technique. Get the brand new number 11 blade out. Poke a few little tiny holes in. Try to cover it. Build up the area around it with paint so it's a little bit higher. And then just feather it in. Now, believe me, if we weren't worried about weight, if this was the decoupage special here, we could just blow on another coat of clear, but we've got it so light, and it's so nice and light, now I really don't want to add anything to it. Here's another little tip. This is a great little tip for you. Well, I leave this can out now for the rest of the buffing job. I may buff through on the other panel. Here's another great little tip for you. When you buff through a black spot, like an ink line, now if you want to go back and touch up an ink line, what you have to do is put ink on and clear. Well, obviously that's going to build up weight, and you have to rebuff it and sand it and everything. What I do is I mix up some very thin black paint and a little tiny brush and just go by all this. There's 4 or 5 little spots I've gone through. They're all in the cap strips. With that, then you can kind of just buff. As soon as you see it coming through, stop, put another coat, wait another couple hours or whatever, even overnight, and you just want 1 coat of black. Now you go to appearance judging. I take 1 little jar of paint of every color that's on the plane and an ink pen, and the day of appearance judging, get done flying a half hour early, wipe the whole plane down with M600, whatnot, and then go around, pick around, and take out all the flaws. And believe me, it does make a difference. When the people are looking at your plane, the front row planes, they're looking, where's a mistake, and it makes them crazy when they can't find something. They're feeling and touching and you really, it's really a neat thing if you can pull one off on them, and there's some thing on here that was repaired and they can't find it. So with that, I got to get the black and do a couple little spots in there. Now what's really great is my friend George Ventrini, who you probably have seen on the videos, a professional artist, and he gives me these little tiny sable hair brushes, which they're about 20 bucks a piece, and they're just perfect for touch-ups like this. Remember, the trick here is to get the paint thin and get on 3 or 4 coats. Don't try to blob on 1 coat. Let's see, there was another spot here. Generally, the spots you go through are going to be right on the cap strip edges. But again, we don't want to add the extra coat of clear, especially on the bottom. I don't think it's, I'd rather save the weight right now. We've gone this far and gotten the weight, hopefully, where we want it. By the way, just a little, little information here. I talked to Ken Augustine this afternoon, and my custom mufflers have been finished and they're in the mail. So I hope I'll have them to do some testing on. We have some really cool looking new mufflers. We may or may not be going into production on them. Once I test them, I'll try to figure out if they're going to be worthwhile to market. A couple another little spot here. A lot of neat stuff coming out this year coming up, you know. A lot of cool stuff. Looks like an awful lot of people are finally disenchanted with the tune pipe operation. And we may see a return to normal engine runs and 2-floor runs and who knows what, maybe a nice season. And if somebody wins a big meet with a 60, you know, they'll be throwing all the pipes overboard. So anyway, just like to really get all the little touch-ups done, and we'll try to give it our best effort in '94. Again, for these little tiny brushes, the best thing is an art supply store.
Best guy, it's about 9 foot over, you're making him look like really proud of home, you know, and I think I had a layout about come right through issues at work collection, but
If you don't think it gets boring after 6.5 hours of doing this, believe me, you get rubber arms. But this is the last wing panel, and we can kind of smell the goal line coming up here. Now, after everything's buffed out once, and this is something to keep in mind, this buffing is not going to hold up forever. It's certainly not going to hold up till the nets. All this does is let us get a real accurate weight and balance, do our bench trimming for vertical CG. And that would be the only reason to do this buffing, because we are going to have to touch this up or go over it lightly in the future. But here's one of the things we have right now is by, I hope tonight, or tomorrow the latest, I'm going to have enough of the paint off of the plane that I can start getting some accurate weights. I can do the assembly. And boy, I would hate to have to buff the whole plane out after you have the flaps permanently in position in the elevators. It gets to be such a nuisance banging into things. You can't get in by the fillets. You can't get the hinge line. So I hope this, you know, the technique, even if you're not using the technique of putting the control surfaces and the rudder and things on last, what you can benefit from is knowing that right now you can get in there and buff everything out and make it all nice and neat. Once it's assembled, try to get in there with little tools and sanding tools. It just makes you crazy. It could make you go out of your mind. So we're sneaking up on this. I should have this, boy, I hope either later today. Do the little touch-up. But it's really been a long day, and I really feel like Charles Atlas here. Now the mainframe is finished. Believe it or not, tonight was a real good night. I'm going to buff out the cowl a little bit. And that's definitely going to be it for tonight. We are really fortunate in having a real good day here. Just finish up the cowl. But like I said before, boy, your arm could really get tired of this stuff. And from this point on, now 6 weeks, 8 weeks from now, this ship will be ready for a final buffing with final shine and or some more Gorhams. Anytime I buff through, I'll have my 3 or 4 little jars of paint here ready to touch it up at a moment's notice. But I think right now I've achieved the lightest possible finish that I could possibly put on here and still have the front row finish that I want. It's all a matter of just having the minimum amount of material on here. I have roughly 8 ounces of clear left from my original gallon. So I really didn't even put it all on. And I like to celebrate at this point in time. I have a little celebration that, hey, I finished the buffing. Believe me, I finished this cowl up. I'm going to be one happy puppy tonight knowing my arm can recover from all this. And what I really hope, and it's kind of an emotional thing on my part, what I really hope is that everybody that spent the 2 hours to watch this tape has learned enough that they can share the joy, and it really is a joy, of buffing out a nice finish, buffing out a dope lacquer finish. I really feel like, well, that's to me one of the great joys of my life is being able to put paint on like this, and I really do look forward to sharing it with people. And if anybody has some better ideas, please send them in, because with people like Walt Prey and Midgley in the hobby and Gerald Champ doing plans and these videotapes and the people that write the columns, Hunt and McMillan, sharing the knowledge that we have is certainly one of the great joys of this event. So I'm finished buffing, at least I hope, for a temporary time here. And I really, tonight, believe me when I tell you, I will sleep like a log. It'll be log time. You really do get a lot of satisfaction when you do the last couple of buffs here. And you really think, hey, years ago when I asked Jim Silhavy, I said, hey Jim, how do you put a finish like that on a plane, man? I'm a 16-year-old kid. Tell me how to do it. And he said, take a walk, kid. You need a haircut, you need a bath. Well, Jim, you're gone, I'm not. I think hundreds of people have learned from these videos. And I'm happy as a pig in aerogloss with the information that I've been able to get to people in this medium. So, with that said, that done, been going crazy here watching videos and trying to never underestimate the help on a boring job like this of just having some video playing. And we will try to cover the rest of the details on the next video. Just for reference sake, this is roughly how much compound, you can see what this does to your hands, how much Gorhams we've used. So if you are going to try Gorhams for the first time, we did do virtually all the buffing with Gorhams on this particular airplane. We did wind up doing quite a bit of touch-up, especially on the bottom, basically because we trying to put on a very little finish. But there's another point here, and I want to make this point. Now, if you decide that it's more important to you to win the concourse or to have a really spectacular looking airplane, well, then it's appropriate. Maybe you want to put that last 8 ounces of clear on, that last 8 fluid ounces on, I don't know. But the achievement here, the thing that I'm happiest with, is that I did get a really relatively nice finish that's all buffed out now. And I did it without adding that tremendous decoupage weight. And that's the thing I want to get across to people, because really almost anybody can put the extra half a gallon of clear and put on more and more and more, and you'll eventually have something that really shines. I mean, many people in the history of the event have gone that route. They make what amounts to be an unflyable plane, and I kind of favor the idea here that we really did save a lot of weight by doing this way. Now, in retrospect, now that the airplane is finished and buffed, I'm really happy that I made the decisions that amounted to having the lightweight now instead of the decoupage. And I still think the plane is attractive enough. It's still attractive enough that it should be a front row plane. At the end of a buffing day, this is the most fun you can have. Is just stand around and admire your little handiwork. This is one of the things I really enjoy. I talked to Ted Fancher about this one day, and we were talking about just sitting in front of the TV set and admiring our handiwork. And I guess all people that create things, all artists, whatever, really do that. And this is just a time for me now. The thing is buffed out, and I really am happy that this part of the job is done, and I can move on to some of the other things. Now, what I did it off camera. It's not a big deal. Is I do have a spot right in here that I had to touch up. I just put a little the airbrush on there, let that dry overnight. Did a couple of the little touch-ups in the ink lines with the thin black. Get all that done, let it dry overnight. We'll come back either tomorrow or the next day and just hey, go on to the next step here. I'm just Now the final phase, the way I do it anyway, is at this point in time everything is buffed out. I look around for my spots to touch up, and there's basically 2 or 3 things to keep in mind, and I think a little drawing here would help. If you have a flat surface, like right up around the fillet, and I have a gouge here, what happened is I stuck my fingernail in there. Well, what I need to do now is fill. Let me do this with a colored pen. Maybe it's maybe. As I need to brush on 2 or 3 coats of dope, and what happens? Spread each one out further than the one before. You can kind of even do this. Now what you need to do is get a sanding block, a piece of balsa wood is fine, and very carefully, a long block, start shaving this down to where it's ultimately, if we exaggerated it a lot, it would look like this. And then just give it a little spritzer of clear. Let the clear go out over it a little bit, and you will have buried that. Now that works even if the plane is 10 years old. Now you have the other kind of a problem, and this is the one that's more difficult, is where you have a cap strip. Let's say, we'll exaggerate this. What happens is right here and right here, you usually wear out the finish on an I-beam or a D-tube. To fix this the right way, what you have to do is kind of bury this in maybe 4 or 5 coats of paint. I have these on the bottom, on the blue. Okay? Then when that's finished, in other words, keep in mind what's happening. I'm going to exaggerate this now. Here we are at the top of the cat, and this is the part that's broken through. Well, you need to build up paint on here that's a little bit further out than where you originally started. You can do this with a brush or with an airbrush. Then what you need to do is avoid hitting this corner. You need to kind of sand it from this side and kind of sand it from this side so that you leave that little fillet of paint on there. Now, a lot of times it's easier if you have a section like this. It's actually easier to gouge this out a little bit with sandpaper so you have a little ditch to fill. And that's a little technique you can keep in mind too. Now, all of these techniques, of course, it just takes a little practice, and I would say practice on the bottom first. Now you want to kind of slice this off this way and slice this way. Now we've done that. I've gotten 4 or 5 little touch-up spots yesterday done here. But what's wrong is it's almost impossible to show them on a video because you're in the macro lens and if your hands are in the way, you can't really see it. But we'll look at the finished product in a couple of days. Now the final thing is, after you do all this, is let it dry. If you let it dry a few days, you'll be way ahead of the game. Once it dries, you can sand it with 1200, and then you can buff it with Gorhams. Now, if you buff through again, just go back to step 1. You can go back. Plane is 10 years old, like the old green plane over there, 10 years old. Sorry for the interruption, but this is a key part of it. What happens if you spray the dope in the morning and try to buff it out in the afternoon or sand it? It's going to be jello. Give it some time to dry. If it's in the summer, it'll dry faster than the winter, obviously. But when you get down to it, now because you've picked one little area that you want to sand, you have to be very, very careful and gingerly about working your way around it. But with a little bit of practice, you can get it so you won't even see the touch-ups, believe me. Now, one last little trick. If you have a wing or a fuselage and you have a spot right here you want to touch up, this is a great tip. This will save you a whole lot of work. Is take yourself a piece of office paper, cut a hole in it, take that and put it right over so that only this is showing, and you have your office paper here. Hit it with the airbrush. Give it a coat, but don't go out onto here any more than necessary. Now, come back. Take another piece of office paper, maybe an hour or 2 later, cut the hole a little bit bigger. So now you have a little bit more overspray. Third time, cut the hole even bigger. And you need to experiment with this, obviously. But now you'll have a patch where there's your colored or clear paint, and then it kind of blends, and then it kind of disappears. And now when you go to buff it out, you'll have about 1/10 the amount of work buffing it out. That office paper trick is a good one. Now, on this tape, I tried to show as many things as I could about the techniques I use in buffing out a plane, and they've worked very well for me. I'm sure there are more sophisticated ways of doing it, more high-tech ways, and I hope we'll be getting some feedback on this tape in the future. In the meantime, every one of these planes, the Sidewinder has had the gear replaced in it, the blocks ripped out, the VMAX has had the nose section repaired, Red Baron has had many, many little repairs. The green plane has been totally refinished, and we may be doing a whole tape on refinishing planes real soon because we're anticipating refinishing the Griffin. Okay, Tradition, you've seen tape 38 last year, has the touch-up, the replacing the bottom block. The Harley plane, we really haven't flown a lot. The yellow plane is going to be due for a whole new motor refit, nose section in the near future. So the point of all this is if you can repair new things and you can repair used things and you have a couple of the techniques in your hand, you'll probably be real successful at buffing, painting, repairing at every part of the hobby. Another thing too, I hope you've picked up from the video, is that all these little parts, having them in little parts like this that you can work on individually, makes the job a lot easier. An awful lot of people, they just suffer and whatever along the way about making buffing out the plane a painful thing. It really shouldn't be that painful, and you've kind of seen this in real life, kind of got an idea of roughly, we try to do 3-4 hours a day maybe for a period of a week and button it up. But you don't want to make it that it's an ordeal, that you're not even enjoying it. And I tried to show another thing is, if you do some movie watching, that'll help. If you kind of just get involved in things around you, you don't need to look at the spot you're buffing. You can buff old planes, new planes. Now, an example of something is when we're going to fly to Red Baron this year, and we'll do this on a future tape, this paint is 5 years old now, we're going to take it and take some Gorham's polish and just rebuff the whole plane out in a matter of one day. Because it's already buffed, it's very, very easy to bring up the shine again. Also, we're still going to do probably some more touch-ups as we glue the flaps on and stuff. Leave the little jars with the brush in them constantly. There's a lot of...